Well, he's left a giant-size hole in our lives. I think unfortunately that the pandemic has the quiet Duchess. For 25 years, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had perfected the art of being invisible. While cameras followed Catherine's fashion choices and dissected Meghan's every move, Sophie conducted 400 engagements a year in practical suits and sensible heels. Her work chronicled by local newspapers rather than international headlines. She preferred it that way. After a rocky start to royal life, tabloid scandals, PR missteps, and the painful learning curve of marrying into the firm, Sophie had found her rhythm in the shadows. She championed causes nobody else wanted, preventing blindness in developing nations, supporting survivors of sexual violence, advocating for women's rights in countries where such advocacy carried real danger. The boring Duchess, one columnist had called her years ago. Sophie had framed the quote in her private office. It was, she felt, the highest compliment she'd ever received. But on a grey November morning at Bagshot Park, her home in Surrey, Sophie received a call that would shatter her comfortable anonymity forever. "The King would like to see you," Sir Clive Alderton said without preamble. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Windsor alone." Sophie knew immediately this wasn't routine. Charles didn't summon family members through his private secretary unless the matter was serious and private. She'd witnessed enough palace intrigue over 2 decades to recognize the signs. That evening, over dinner with her husband, Edward, she tried to puzzle out what Charles might want. "Perhaps he's expanding your patronages," Edward suggested, ever optimistic. "You've been doing exceptional work with the gender-based violence campaign." Sophie set down her fork. "Charles doesn't personally intervene for patronage expansion. This is something else. Are you worried? I'm curious. There's a difference." But alone in her study later that night, Sophie admitted to herself that worry and curiosity weren't mutually exclusive. The monarchy was in a delicate position. Charles's reign still finding its footing, William preparing for his own eventual succession, and the Harry and Meghan situation, leaving a void that nobody had adequately filled that void. Sophie understood it better than most people realized. When Harry and Meghan left, they'd taken something essential with them. Star power, youth appeal, the ability to connect with demographics the monarchy desperately needed. Catherine did her part brilliantly, but she couldn't be everywhere. The family needed reinforcements. Sophie looked at herself in the mirror. 58 years old, gray threading through blonde hair she'd stopped dyeing. Laugh lines earned through decades of public service. She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't particularly photogenic. She was reliable, competent, and utterly unglamorous. Hardly Meghan's replacement. Windsor Castle's private apartments felt different in winter. Less grand, more intimate. The kind of space where real conversations could happen. Charles waited in his study. Surrounded by watercolors he'd painted himself and photographs documenting a lifetime of duty. "Sophie, thank you for coming." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. No tea service, no staff hovering. "This was serious, Your Majesty." She settled into the chair, noting the documents on his desk, the careful way he was choosing his words. "I'm going to be direct because I respect you too much for palace games. The monarchy is facing a crisis of relevance among young people, particularly young women, Meghan, whatever else happened. Connected with that demographic in ways we haven't replicated since Diana." Sophie nodded, unsure where this was leading. "Catherine is extraordinary, but she's the future queen. She can't be everything to everyone. Mother, future consort, fashion icon, and voice for modern women's issues. We need someone else to carry that particular torch." Charles leaned forward. "I'm asking you to become that person." Sophie blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Charles pulled out the documents, spreading them across his desk. "I'm proposing a new role, special representative for women and equality. You'd be the public face of the monarchy's commitment to gender equality, women's rights, and modern social issues. Increased visibility, international platform, resources to expand your current work exponentially. Charles, I'm 58 years old. Young women don't want to see someone my age representing." "That's exactly wrong." His interruption was gentle but firm. "Young women are tired of seeing only 20-somethings held up as role models. They want to see women at every stage of life succeeding, contributing, and mattering. Your age is an asset, not a liability. Sophie studied the documents. The scope was staggering. Collaboration with UN Women, high-profile campaigns, media partnerships, and even a documentary series. This wasn't a quiet expansion of her existing work. Why me? Why not? And Anne is 74 and doesn't want the expanded profile. I need someone with decades ahead of them. Someone who can build relationships that last beyond one reign. Charles's expression softened. You've proven yourself capable of handling the most difficult aspects of this life. You survived mistakes, learned from them, and built a career of substance. That's exactly the narrative we need. The narrative, Sophie caught the word. This is about replacing Meghan in the public imagination. This is about filling a genuine need that Meghan's departure made painfully obvious. If that also addresses some of the criticism we've faced about how we treated her, that's not a cynical calculation. It's good governance. Sophie stood and paced to the window overlooking the quadrangle. Below, tourists clustered near the gates, phones raised, hoping for a glimpse of royalty. They wouldn't recognize her if she walked past them. I built my career on not being the story, on letting the work speak for itself. This role you're proposing, I'd become the story. Every outfit analyzed, every word dissected my age and appearance and choices, subjected to the same scrutiny that drove Meghan away. Yes, Charles admitted, you would, and it would be brutal at times, but you're not Meghan. No offense to her. You're established, unflappable, and you have 25 years of earned credibility. The press can be vicious, but they can't claim you're untested. What does Edward think? I haven't told him. I wanted your answer first. Sophie turned to face him. And if I say no, then we continue as we are, watching our relevance erode among the next generation, while pretending we don't need to change. Charles's bluntness was refreshing. I'm asking a lot, Sophie. I know that. But I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe you were the only person who could do this successfully. Sophie didn't answer immediately. Charles hadn't expected her to. That was one of the things he respected about her. She didn't perform decisiveness for appearance's sake. She actually thought things through. I need to discuss this with Edward. And I need to see the full scope of what you're proposing. Not just the vision, but the practicalities, resources, staff, protection, clear parameters about decision-making authority. Of course, I've had my team prepare a comprehensive brief. He handed her a thick folder. Take a week. Think about it. Talk to Edward. Talk to Anne if you want perspective. But Sophie, he paused, choosing his words carefully. The monarchy needs this. More than that, the women and girls who benefit from your work need the amplified platform this role would provide. The folder sat on the passenger seat like a bomb waiting to detonate her carefully constructed life. She thought about Meghan, a woman she'd met only a handful of times, but felt she understood in ways the press never would. Meghan had wanted to use her platform for good, to modernize the monarchy, to connect with people who felt excluded by centuries of tradition. She'd been punished for that ambition, labeled difficult and demanding and American in ways that carried coded messages about race and class and belonging. Now, Charles wanted Sophie to do essentially the same thing, but with the protection of being white, titled, and already broken in by decades of royal service. The privilege of that wasn't lost on her, but neither was the opportunity. If she could take the foundation Meghan had built, the conversations about mental health, racial justice, women's empowerment, and carry it forward with institutional support instead of institutional resistance, wasn't that worth the personal cost? Sophie's phone buzzed. A text from Edward. How did it go? She responded simply, we need to talk. Edward found her in her study that evening. The folder's contents spread across every available surface. He read through the proposal in silence, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern to something resembling pride. This is extraordinary, he said finally and terrifying. My thoughts exactly. Do you want to do it? Sophie considered the question honestly. Part of me wants to run screaming. The scrutiny, the pressure, the inevitable comparisons to Meghan. It's everything I've worked to avoid. And the other part thinks about all the girls I've met through my work in South Sudan, in India, in Pakistan. Girls who are fighting for education, for safety, for the basic right to exist without violence. If I could give their stories a bigger platform, if I could use royal celebrity, God, I hate that phrase, to make people care about issues they currently ignore. She trailed off. Edward sat beside her. You'd be brilliant at this. You know that, right? You've been doing this work in the shadows for years. All Charles is asking is that you do it in the light. The light is where they burn you. Only if you're made of wax, you're made of stronger stuff. Sophie leaned against her husband, grateful for his steadiness. If I do this, our life changes. No more quiet anonymity. Our children will face more scrutiny. You'll be asked to expand your role too. Our children are adults who can handle it. And I've been the least famous royal for decades. I think my ego can survive some additional attention. Edward pulled her closer. The real question is, can you live with yourself if you say no? Sophie closed her eyes. The answer, she realized, was already taking shape. She couldn't. Not when the opportunity to do meaningful good on a massive scale was being offered. Not when she'd spent 25 years preparing for exactly this, even if she hadn't known it. I'm going to say yes, she whispered. I know, Edward replied. I've known since you walked in the door. The palace machinery. 1 week later, Sophie returned to Windsor with her answer and her conditions. She'd spent the intervening days consulting lawyers, talking to trusted advisors, and most importantly, speaking with women who'd worked with her over the years about what they needed most. Charles listened to her conditions without interruption: complete autonomy over her messaging on women's issues, direct access to the king without layers of intermediaries, protection from the same press office failures that had hampered Meghan, and guaranteed funding for her initiatives through the sovereign grant. Agreed, Charles said when she finished all of it. I need you empowered, not hobbled by bureaucracy. Then I accept. The relief on Charles's face was genuine. Thank you, Sophie. Truly, don't thank me yet. You're about to discover why quiet competence is easier than visible leadership. The announcement was scheduled for 3 weeks out, giving palace machinery time to prepare. But first, Charles needed to inform the key players, starting with William. This is a significant expansion of Sophie's role. William said carefully after Charles explained the full scope. I'm not opposed, but I have questions. Ask them, how does this affect Catherine's position? She's worked hard to establish herself as the primary female voice for our generation of royals. Catherine spoke before Charles could answer. William, I think this is brilliant. I'm exhausted trying to be everything to everyone. If Sophie handles women's rights and equality issues, I can focus on early years development without guilt that I'm neglecting other important work. William looked at his wife in surprise. You knew about this. Charles called me yesterday, wanted my blessing before proceeding. Catherine smiled at Sophie. You have it, obviously. I think you'll be extraordinary. Sir Clive assembled the communications team for what he called the most important role out of this reign. 15 people crammed into the meeting room: press secretaries, social media managers, speech writers, and strategic advisors. We're threading several needles simultaneously. Clive began, pulling up presentation slides. We need to position this as a natural evolution of Sophie's existing work, not a reaction to Meghan's departure. We need to address the vacancy she left without making it seem like we're admitting failure. And we need to protect Sophie from the same media-feeding frenzy that contributed to Meghan leaving. Impossible, one of the younger advisors muttered. Difficult, Clive corrected. Not impossible. Here's how we do it. The strategy was multifaceted. Exclusive interviews with sympathetic journalists who'd covered Sophie's work for years, a major speech at the UN outlining her vision, a documentary following her existing projects to establish credibility, and most importantly, a completely revamped approach to press relations. No more sources say or palace insiders claim. Clive decreed, if we have something to communicate, we say it directly and on the record. The anonymous briefing culture that destroyed trust during the Sussex situation ends now. Sophie, sitting in on the meeting, raised her hand. What about comparisons to Meghan? They are inevitable. We don't avoid them. We address them directly. Clive pulled up a draft statement. We acknowledge that Meghan helped modernize conversations around mental health and social justice. We say Sophie is building on that foundation with the benefit of decades of experience and institutional support. We turn the comparison into a compliment to both women. That's diplomatic, Sophie noted. That's survival, Clive replied. The night before the announcement, Charles hosted a private family dinner at Windsor. William and Catherine, Edward and Sophie Anne, and even Andrew exiled from public life, but still the family gathered around the table. The conversation was surprisingly normal. Andrew complained about his golf game and discussed her upcoming trip to Kenya. William told a story about George's latest school project. The ordinariness of it felt almost subversive. These people about to dominate headlines worldwide, eating roast chicken and discussing mundane life. But toward the end of the meal, Charles raised his glass. Tomorrow, we begin a new chapter. Sophie has agreed to take on a role that will challenge her and challenge us as an institution. I'm asking all of you to support her publicly and privately as she navigates territory we've historically handled poorly. Here's to Sophie, William said, surprising her with genuine warmth. May you succeed where we've failed. They drank to that, the crystal glasses catching candle light. The moment feeling both ordinary and historic, Sophie caught Edward's eye across the table and saw pride mixed with concern. This was their last night of anonymity. Tomorrow, everything changed. Sophie couldn't sleep. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She almost ignored it, then curiosity won. Sophie, it's Meghan. I heard about tomorrow. I just wanted to say you're going to be brilliant at this. Don't let them dim your light the way they did mine. Stand firm. Trust yourself. The women and girls who need this work are counting on you. Good luck, sir. Sophie stared at the message for a long time. Meghan had every reason to be bitter, to resent anyone stepping into a role that should. Instead, she was offering encouragement, passing the torch, even though it had been forcibly taken from her. Sophie typed back, "Thank you. I won't let them down. Or you." The response came quickly. "You won't. You're not me. That's your strength. Be yourself, and that will be enough." Sophie set down the phone, feeling the weight of the moment. Tomorrow, she'd step into the light. Tonight, she let herself be grateful for the shadows that had prepared her. Outside her window, dawn was still hours away, but morning was coming whether she was ready or not. The announcement Buckingham Palace's stateroom was packed with journalists from 50 countries. The announcement had been teased as significant but not specified, leading to wild speculation in the preceding days. Some predicted another royal engagement. Others suggested a major policy shift. Nobody had guessed the truth. Sophie sat beside Charles at the raised table, Edward to her other side. The cameras felt like physical pressure. The anticipation in the room almost overwhelming. She'd done hundreds of engagements, but never as the main event. Always supporting, never leading, not anymore. Today, I'm pleased to announce the creation of a new role, Special Representative for Women and Equality. This position will coordinate the royal family's work on gender equality, women's rights, and social justice issues, both domestically and internationally. He turned to Sophie with genuine warmth. I'm honored that the Duchess of Edinburgh has agreed to take on this crucial responsibility. The room erupted with questions, shouted over each other, some in English, some in other languages. Sophie felt the chaos wash over her, then took a breath and leaned toward the microphone. If I could just say a few words before questions. The room quieted, surprised by her directness. Sophie had prepared remarks, but in the moment, she set them aside and spoke from her heart. I've spent 25 years doing this work quietly, visiting women's refuges that never made headlines, supporting survivors of sexual violence whose stories were too painful for mainstream coverage, advocating for girls' education in countries where such advocacy is dangerous. Her voice was steady, clear. I've been privileged to do that work without significant media attention, and there's value in that approach. She paused, making eye contact with journalists in the front row. But there's also a limitation. Some issues need spotlight, not shadows. Some stories deserve megaphones, not whispers. The Duchess of Sussex began important conversations about mental health, about racial justice, and about modernizing this institution. Those conversations didn't end when she left. They can't end because the issues are too important. The mention of Meghan caused a visible ripple through the room. Sophie leaned into it. I'm not here to replace anyone. You can't replace unique voices, and the Duchess of Sussex was uniquely positioned to speak to communities I'll never fully understand. But I can build on the foundation she helped establish. I can use whatever platform this role provides to amplify voices that are too often ignored. And I can do it with the benefit of institutional support that frankly wasn't available before. Are you saying the institution failed, Meghan? A journalist called out, I'm saying we're learning. Institutions that don't learn from mistakes don't survive. Sophie's bluntness was refreshing. This role exists partly because we recognize gaps in our approach. I'm hoping to fill some of those gaps. Within hours, Sophie was trending worldwide. The coverage split predictably. Some outlets praised her candor and substance. Others accused the palace of cynical manipulation, and still others questioned whether a 58-year-old woman could connect with young audiences. But one unexpected element emerged: genuine excitement from advocacy groups who'd worked with Sophie for years. Testimonials poured in from women's rights organizations, anti-trafficking networks, and survivors groups, all praising her authenticity and commitment. Sophie doesn't do photo ops. One charity director told BBC News, she shows up, does the work, and follows through. If she's being given a bigger platform, that's good news for everyone working on these issues. The contrast with Meghan coverage was stark, where Meghan had been questioned and doubted. Sophie was vouched for by years of quiet credibility. Sophie's first event in the new role was deliberately low-key, a round discussion with women's rights activists at a London community centre. No formal speeches, no grand announcements, just conversation. But the media presence was anything but low-key. 50 photographers clustered outside, camera drones hovered overhead, and live television trucks blocked the street. Sophie experienced what Meghan had faced daily: the suffocating attention that turned every movement into spectacle. Inside, the activists were patient as Sophie navigated the circus of arrival. Once the doors closed and cameras were excluded, the relief was palpable. Welcome to visibility, one activist said. Riley gets exhausting quickly, doesn't it? Is it always like this? Sophie asked. For you, now it will be. You've crossed the threshold from working royal to celebrity royal. There's no going back. The round discussion that followed was substantive. Conversations about funding, about policy changes, about how royal attention could be leveraged for advocacy without overwhelming the actual work. Sophie took notes, asked questions, and gradually forgot about the cameras outside until she left and faced the barrage. But the photographers went crazy anyway, the clicking shutters like machine gun fire. In the car, Sophie closed her eyes briefly. You did well, her private secretary said quietly. That was one round table. I have 300 events scheduled this year. Then we pace ourselves and remember why we're doing this. That evening, Catherine called. I saw the coverage. You were perfect. I felt like I was drowning. That's normal. The first few months are brutal. You're learning to breathe underwater while everyone watches. Catherine's voice was warm with understanding. Yes, don't read the comments. Don't engage with critics. Focus on the work and trust that substance outlasts spectacle. Catherine paused, and call me when it gets overwhelming. I've been where you are. I can help. Sophie felt tears prick unexpectedly. She and Catherine had always been cordial, but not close. Different generations, different roles, different approaches, but the crisis created a connection. Thank you, truly, we're family. This is what family does. Meghan and Harry issued a statement through their foundation that surprised many. We're encouraged to see the monarchy investing in women's rights and equality advocacy. The Duchess of Edinburgh has demonstrated a genuine commitment to these issues for decades. We wish her success in this expanded role and hope the institutional support she receives enables meaningful impact. The statement was gracious, supportive, and subtly pointed. The emphasis on institutional support, a reminder of what they'd lacked, but it was also undeniably generous. Sophie sent a private thank you. Meghan responded with equal warmth. Two women who'd never been close, united by the peculiar experience of being royal wives, navigating impossible expectations. The British press predictably tried to create rivalry. Sussex statement, bitter or gracious, one headline asked, determined to manufacture conflict even where none existed. Sophie ignored it as Catherine had advised. She was learning the first rule of high-profile royal life. You can't control the narrative, but you can control your response to it. Silence in the right moment was power. 3 weeks into her new role, Sophie delivered her first major international speech at UN Women in New York. The room was packed with diplomats, activists, celebrities, and crucially, global media. She spoke about gender-based violence, about education access, and about economic empowerment. But she also spoke about institutional responsibility, how organizations with power and a platform had obligations to use them. Well, for too long, conversations about women's rights have been relegated to niche spaces, treated as secondary concerns, addressed only when convenient. Sophie said, her voice ringing with conviction, that ends now. These aren't women's issues, they're human rights issues. They're economic issues. They're fundamental questions about what kind of world we want to build. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes. Sophie, uncomfortable with the attention, used the time to scan the audience and saw something that mattered more than applause. Activists she'd worked with for years, women who'd trusted her with their stories. Seeing that trust validated by this platform that night, trending above celebrity, gossip, and political scandal, was #Sophie. The reviews were almost universally positive. Even critics who'd questioned the announcement admitted she'd proven herself. Charles called to congratulate her. You've made it impossible for anyone to dismiss this as a publicity stunt. Well done, it's only been 3 weeks, exactly. Imagine what 3 years will look like. Sophie hung up and looked at herself in the hotel mirror. 6 weeks into her new role, a tabloid published an exclusive investigation, claiming she'd known about the position months before the official announcement, suggesting calculated ambition rather than reluctant acceptance. The article was a masterclass in innuendo. Technically accurate facts arranged to create false impressions. Yes, Sophie had known about the role before the announcement. No, that didn't mean she'd lobbied for it or connived to steal Meghan's spotlight, but nuance doesn't sell newspapers. Ambitious Sophie's long game screamed one headline. How the quiet Duchess schemed her way to the top, claimed another. Sophie read the coverage in her study, feeling the familiar nausea of being misunderstood and unable to correct the record without making it worse. Edward found her there. The newspapers spread across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. They're doing to you what they did to her. I know, Sophie's voice was flat. I just thought I don't know what I thought. That decades of boring competence would protect me. That being unglamorous would make me less of a target. The mistake is thinking any of them care about accuracy. They care about drama. Edward collected the newspapers and tossed them in the bin. You know what you need to do. Keep working and ignore it. Exactly. But ignoring proved difficult when social media amplified every criticism. A vocal contingent online accused Sophie of being complicit in Meghan's treatment, of benefiting from racism she'd done nothing to combat, of accepting a role that should have been Meghan's to expand. Some criticism was fair. Sophie had been silent during the worst of the attacks on Meghan, prioritizing institutional loyalty over moral courage. Other criticism was bad faith, looking for any excuse to attack the monarchy through its newest representative. Sophie's communications team urged her not to engage, but she struggled with the passive approach. These were legitimate concerns from communities she was supposed to serve. Ignoring them felt wrong. What if I addressed it directly? She suggested during a strategy meeting. Acknowledge that I should have spoken up before, that I'm trying to do better now. Her press secretary winced. That opens you to accusations of pandering, and it gives critics more ammunition. They'll say you're admitting guilt. Maybe I am guilty of silence when I should have spoken. Ma'am, respectfully, you're being too honest for modern media relations. Sophie smiled without humor. That's probably true, but I'm 58 years old. I'm too old to pretend I'm perfect and too tired to maintain elaborate fictions. If I made mistakes, I'd rather own them and move forward than spend years defending the indefensible. 2 days later, an op-ed appeared in The Guardian that shifted the conversation. The author was Marcus Rashford, the footballer and activist who'd famously campaigned on child poverty. He wrote about Sophie's work with disadvantaged youth, about her quiet visits to community centers that never generated headlines, about her genuine commitment to understanding issues before speaking on them. The Duchess of Edinburgh isn't perfect, Rashford wrote, but she's doing something rare in public life. Listening more than talking, learning before leading, and using privilege to amplify rather than overshadow. The piece went viral, prompting other advocacy leaders to share their own experiences with Sophie. A pattern emerged. She'd been doing meaningful work for years while carefully avoiding the spotlight. That avoidance now looked less like cowardice and more like strategic humility. William requested a private meeting, his expression serious when Sophie arrived at Kensington Palace. Catherine was conspicuously absent. This was official business, not a family conversation. The palace is concerned about your media strategy, William began without preamble or lack thereof. I'm being honest, isn't that what people want? People say they want honesty until they get it. Then they weaponize it. William's tone was sharp with experience. Every admission of imperfection will be used against you. Every acknowledgement of past mistakes will become evidence of ongoing inadequacy. So I should lie, you should be strategic. There's a middle ground between dishonesty and excessive candor. William softened slightly. I'm not criticizing your work. You've been excellent, but you're still learning how to protect yourself while being public. That learning curve is steep and unforgiving. Sophie studied the future king, seeing the armor he'd built through decades of scrutiny. Is that really how you want to live? Always calculated, never vulnerable. It's how I have to live, and now that you're in this role, it's how you have to live too. William's expression was almost pitying. Welcome to the front row, Sophie. It's brilliant and terrible in equal measure. The next morning, Sophie attended a women's refuge in Manchester. She'd visited this particular refuge annually for 15 years, long before anyone cared about her work. The women there knew her, trusted her, and had shared stories they'd never told publicly. This visit was supposed to be routine, but the media presence had transformed it into a circus. Sophie felt her frustration rising. This was exactly the problem. How could these women speak honestly with 50 cameras outside? But the refuge director had a plan. We'll do the photo op at arrival. Sophie smiled for the cameras, answered 3 carefully chosen questions, and then the press was politely but firmly asked to leave. Inside, away from scrutiny, Sophie sat with women who'd survived horrific violence and were rebuilding their lives. One woman, mid-20s, recognized her from recent coverage. You're getting roasted online. Sophie laughed a bit. Yes, good means you're doing something that matters. They only attack when you're making a difference. The simple wisdom hits Sophie hard. These women who'd endured real trauma, who had actual reasons to be cynical, were telling her that criticism meant impact. Thank you, Sophie said quietly. I needed to hear that. We're glad you're doing this. All of us here have seen how much more attention our issues are getting since you got this big job. Don't stop because some people are mean. Driving back to London, Sophie felt the doubt lift, not entirely. Doubt was probably permanent now, but enough to remember why this mattered. That evening, Charles called personally. I heard Manchester went well. It did, despite the media chaos. Sophie, I want to apologize. This was unexpected. When I asked you to take this role, I minimized how difficult it would be. I told you about the opportunities without fully acknowledging the costs. That wasn't fair. You're not responsible for tabloid behavior. No, but I'm responsible for putting you in their crosshairs, and I should check in more regularly. Make sure you have support. Charles paused. Are you regretting saying yes? Sophie considered lying, then remembered her commitment to honesty. Some days, yes. Today, no. Ask me again tomorrow, and the answer might change. That's reasonable and honest. Can I share something? Of course. My mother, your late mother-in-law, told me once that the hardest part of this life isn't the work or the scrutiny. It's maintaining a genuine belief in your purpose. while everyone tells you different stories about who you are, and eventually, surprisingly, me. Charles's voice carried affection. Find yours, Sophie. Listen to them. Ignore everyone else. After hanging up, Sophie looked at the short list of people whose opinions actually mattered. Edward, her children, Anne, Catherine, and the women she served. Everyone else was commenting, not having a conversation. That realization was freeing in ways she hadn't anticipated. The legacy spring arrived with the kind of gentle warmth that England does better than anywhere else. Sophie stood in the garden at Buckingham Palace preparing for what Palace Communications had dubbed the summit, a gathering of women's rights activists, policymakers, and advocates from 40 countries. 6 months into her role, Sophie had learned to navigate the peculiar space between celebrity and substance. She'd launched successful campaigns on period poverty, maternal mortality, and domestic violence. She'd secured millions in funding from private donors and government partnerships. She'd become, despite her initial reluctance, a recognizable face for causes that desperately needed visibility. More importantly, she'd maintained her authenticity. The feared transformation into a different person, polished, calculating, media perfect, hadn't happened. She was still Sophie, just Sophie with a microphone. 5 minutes, ma'am, her private secretary announced. Sophie took a breath, smoothed her suit, still practical, still sensible, still distinctly unglamorous, and stepped into her purpose. The state atrium was magnificent, but Sophie had insisted on an intimate setup rather than the formal stage initially planned. Attendees sat in a large circle. No hierarchy of front and back rows, no physical barriers between speaker and audience. 6 months ago, I accepted a role I wasn't sure I deserved. Sophie began, standing in the center of the circle. I'd spent 25 years working quietly, avoiding attention, telling myself that anonymous service was somehow nobler than visible leadership. She paused, making eye contact with women around the circle, activists she'd admired for years, survivors who'd shared their stories, advocates who'd been fighting these battles long before royal attention arrived. I was wrong. Visibility isn't vanity. It's responsibility. Platform isn't privilege. It's an obligation. And silence, no matter how well intentioned, is complicity. The room was absolutely still. Sophie felt the weight of their attention, the earned right to speak about things that mattered. This role exists because the woman who should have been allowed to expand it was forced out. The Duchess of Sussex began conversations that this institution wasn't ready to have. She paid a price for that courage, and we failed her. I can't undo that failure, but I can honor her effort by continuing the work she started. I want to thank the Duchess of Edinburgh for her leadership on issues that matter deeply to me. Meghan said, her message clearly recorded specifically for this summit. When I left the UK, I worried that important conversations would end. Instead, they've been carried forward by someone with the institutional support to make real change. That's what matters, not who gets credit, but whether progress happens. Meghan's image looked directly at the camera. To all the activists in that room, you have a genuine ally in Sophie. Trust that, use that, and know that across the ocean, I'm supporting the same work in different ways. We're all on the same team. The message ended. Sophie felt her throat tighten. They'd corresponded since the announcement, but never coordinated anything public. The summit concluded with a reception where policymakers, donors, and activists mingled. Sophie worked the room with practiced efficiency, but her attention was caught by a corner conversation between 3 young women, 2 British, 1 American, discussing how royal attention had impacted their organizations. Sophie approached prepared to be recognized, but they were so engaged in conversation that they didn't notice her immediately. The thing about Sophie, one was saying, is that she actually shows up not just for photo ops. She shows up, does the work, remembers details from previous visits. It's not performance. My organization worked with Meghan briefly before everything went wrong. The American woman said she was brilliant, but constantly fighting palace bureaucracy. Sophie has that same energy, but with institutional backing. It's what Meghan should have had. Do you think Sophie knows how much this matters? The third woman asked. I hope so, the first replied. because if she burns out or gets forced out, we're back to square one. Sophie retreated before they could spot her, their words echoing. The responsibility felt heavier knowing how many people were counting on this to work, but also more purposeful. This mattered, she mattered, not because of title or status, but because of what she was choosing to do with the platform she'd been given. That night, exhausted but satisfied, Sophie found a handwritten letter waiting in her private office. The handwriting was Diana's, a letter written 30 years ago, but preserved in palace archives and delivered now by Charles's instruction. Dearest Sophie, if you're reading this, it means you've taken on a role that terrifies and energizes you in equal measure. I know that feeling well. The pressure to be perfect, the fear of failure, the constant awareness that you're being judged by impossible standards. Here's what I learned. You can't be everything to everyone, but you can be authentic to yourself while serving others. That authenticity, that willingness to be imperfect and visible matters more than polished performance ever could. Use your platform for good. Make noise about issues that matter, and when they attack you, and they will remember that criticism means you're having an impact. Comfort doesn't change systems, disruption does. You're stronger than you think. Trust that. With love and faith, Diana. Sophie read the letter 3 times, tears streaming unchecked. Diana had understood this burden decades before Sophie faced it. The letter felt like a blessing and a warning both. 1 year after accepting Charles's shocking proposal, Sophie stood again in the garden at Bagshot Park, the same spot where she'd processed the initial offer. So much had changed, she'd changed, the monarchy had changed. The conversation about what royal service could accomplish had fundamentally shifted. Her phone buzzed, a message from Meghan. Saw the commission announcement. You're doing it right, proud of you. Sophie typed back, couldn't have done it without the foundation you built. Thank you, because that was the truth. Meghan had taken the hits, fought the battles, and forced the conversations that made Sophie's success possible. Acknowledging that wasn't a weakness, it was accuracy, it was integrity, Edward joined her in the garden. 2 glasses of wine in hand. Congratulations on the anniversary. 1 year of being famous, 1 year of being useful, Sophie corrected. The fame is just an annoying byproduct. They drank to the year behind and the work ahead. To uncomfortable growth and earned credibility to choose impact over comfort, visibility over anonymity, purpose over ease. Sophie looked up at the stars emerging in the darkening sky somewhere. She liked to think Diana was watching, and maybe hopefully she was proud. Proud that Sophie had taken the role nobody expected her to accept and transformed it into something nobody could have predicted. What's your take on Duchess Sophie's transformation from working royal to high-profile advocate? Do you think she successfully filled the void left by Meghan's departure, or is the comparison between them fundamentally unfair? Share your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing your perspective on royal dynamics. If this story resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe for more in-depth royal analyses. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our exclusive deep dives into palace intrigue and modern monarchy. Which royal story should we explore next? Drop your suggestions below. Remember, authenticity always outlasts performance in royal life and beyond. Thanks for watching.